How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Tes, Daf 59 of Masechtas Zevachim. Friends, this is exciting. Well, 59 is close to 60. Zevachim is 120 pages, so we're just about halfway through Masechtas Zevachim, which is pretty cool. Masechtas Zevachim has been something else. I was reflecting about recently that there hasn't really been like a respite in Masechtas Zevachim. It's pretty much just been full on. Usually eventually we'll get some Agadita thrown in there somewhere. I don't know. Agadita doesn't really ring in much of a bell for me in Zevachim. It just seems like we're just on all the time. Daf after daf, just all on all the time. But it's been gewaldig. It's been pretty awesome. However, it's also 1:45 in the morning. This is the second night in a row that I'm recording after midnight, which is not, meaning, generally speaking, for the past 6 years, every single day at 2 in the morning, a daf has been recorded, edited, uploaded, ready to go, 2 a.m. Yesterday, the daf wasn't uploaded until 4:30 in the morning. Sheesh, today it's not going to be available probably till about, I don't know, earliest 4:30, but I'm probably not going to finish recording till 2. Then I got to edit, upload, compile, all that stuff. So, but it's gewaldig. Today's going to be a great, I had an opportunity to do Bikur Cholim earlier today, which that was good, but it also delayed things a bit, but that was good. Today's daf is going to be gewaldig, right? There's a bunch of diagrams on today's daf, so I had to be making diagrams, which is really fun. It takes a lot of time, but it was super fun. So anyways, today's daf is going to be interesting. We're going to wrap, in the first part of today's daf, we're going to wrap up the discussion from yesterday about the location of the mizbeach. Was it in the north, in the south, right? That kind of stuff. That is going to be cool. And then we will discuss when the mizbeach gets damaged. If the mizbeach gets damaged, what are the implications for kodshim, for animals that have been set aside to be korbanis, slaughtered alive? Do they become pasul? Are they kosher? We will discuss that question. And finally, we will discuss the dimensions of the mizbeach. All interesting things. There's going to be several diagrams and different ways of looking at the mizbeach, the location of the mizbeach. It should be a pretty fun daf. Chevra, let us jump in. Friends, we're going to begin on Daf Nun Ches Amid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Rav Shrevia Amar Mani Reb Yosef Glili Hi. Chevra, do you remember what we are talking about? What we're talking about is Reb Yochanan had said yesterday that he has a tradition that Reb Yossi's opinion is that the mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. Came Reb Zera, and he was saying, well, if this is in fact Reb Yossi's opinion that the mizbeach is in the north of the Azara, we must have some kind of reference to Reb Yossi's opinion in the Mishnayos someplace. And Reb Zera says, well, there is this Mishnah in Masechta Talmud that talks about the pyre of this secondary pyre on the mizbeach and where exactly it was positioned. And basically, Reb Zera wanted to argue that Mishnah is authored by Reb Yossi, and the only way that Mishnah can make sense is if the mizbeach is in the north of the Azara, and therefore it must be that here we have a proof in the Mishnayos that Reb Yossi's opinion is that the mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. Fine. We then suggested maybe it's not Reb Yossi, maybe it's Reb Yehuda. Now we're going to suggest a third option, which is that it is Reb Yossi, it is the opinion of Reb Yossi HaGlili, that it's Reb Yossi HaGlili's opinion that the mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. Okay. So Rav Shrevia Amar says of Shrevia Amani Reb Yossi HaGlili that the Mishnah in Talmud is taka the opinion of Reb Yossi HaGlili. The Tanya that we learned in the Brayso Reb Yossi HaGlili says Reb Yossi HaGlili mitoch shenemar v'nasatas a Kiyor ben oil moed vegomer ves mizbach ha'ola vegomer. We learned a little bit about the Kiyor earlier in the Masechta. The Kiyor is what the Kohanim, it was a source of water that the Kohanim it was water that the Kohanim would use that water to Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, to wash their hands and feet before they did the Avodah. Now, this Kiyor, this basin, where was it located? It was located in the Azar. Where in the Azar? So the pasuk says, one pasuk says, let's find these psukim are not quoted full. There's more to the psukim that would be helpful. So the pasuk says, "V'nasates akiyor." This is the first pasuk. I'm reading the pasuk. Ben oil moed uven mizbeach v'nasates shamoim. We're going to see plenty of diagrams in a minute. But the Kiyor, so this basin, was between the oil moed, the ulam, the heichol. We'll call it the oil moed. Well, we can call it either the ulam or the heichol, or right now we'll call it the oil moed. So the Kiyor was positioned between the oil moed and the mizbeach. Of course, the mizbeach was in the Azara, outside of the oil moed, outside of the heichol and the ulam. So you have the oil moed, and then you have the mizbeach, and between them is the Kiyor. However, we have another pasuk that says, "Bez mizbach ha'ola, some Pesach mishkan oil moed," that the mizbeach was by the entrance of the oil moed, i.e., there was nothing in between them. There was nothing obstructing. There was nothing in the middle between the mizbeach and the opening and the entrance to the oil moed. So the Kiyor could not have been in the middle there. So where was the Kiyor positioned? Right? Because on the one hand, we're saying that on the one hand, we're saying that the Kiyor was between the oil moed and the mizbeach. On the other hand, we have another pasuk that says, "Ves mizbach ha'ola," right? It's Pesach oil moed, that the mizbeach is mamish right by the opening to the oil moed, and there's no Kiyor in between. So, Chaver, what do we do with this seeming contradiction? Mizbeach bepesach oil moed v'lo Kiyor bepesach oil moed. That second pasuk is saying that it's the mizbeach that's by the opening, by the entrance to the oil moed. There's no Kiyor there. Heichonaya, no. So therefore, where was the Kiyor placed? Beina ulam v'la mizbeach moshuch kima klapi adorim. So says Rabbi Yossi Aglili that where was the Kiyor placed? Beina ulam v'la mizbeach, between the ulam and the mizbeach, between the oil moed and the mizbeach. Moshuch kima klapi adorim, a little bit to the south. Okay, I'm not going to open up a diagram just yet because I didn't make a diagram. I'm not going because I don't have a diagram for this because we haven't really gotten yet into the nitty gritty of trying to explain it. Basically, what I'll just say al regel achas now, and then we'll see plenty of diagrams in a second. But basically, what Rabbi Yossi Aglili is saying is that the Kiyor was essentially to the south of the mizbeach. It was not in between the mizbeach and the opening of the oil moed. Rather, it was to the south of the mizbeach. It was not in between. It was lower than. It was below the mizbeach. Now, Micah Sover. Now, what does Rabbi Yossi Aglili hold in terms of where the mizbeach was positioned? So let me actually, maybe even I will pull up the kind of concluding diagram. I'll pull up the final diagram first, the resulting diagram, just so you could visualize what this means, that it was to the south of the mizbeach, and then we'll get back into trying to figure out how we arrived there. So I'm going to pull up actually the final slide here, which is what's going to be the conclusion of the Gemara. What do you see in this slide? You see obviously the ulam and the mizbeach, right? I'm sorry. Well, yes, but you see the ulam and the heichol, right? What we're calling the oil moed. You see the mizbeach over there, and you see a yellow arrow pointing to a little right, a golden arrow pointing to a little golden dot. That golden dot represents the Kiyor. And we see that the Kiyor, the dot representing the Kiyor, is to the south of the mizbeach. It is not in between the ulam and the mizbeach. It's not in between the ulam and the mizbeach. It's a little bit to the south of the mizbeach. And the question is, why does the Kiyor dafka have to be this to the south of the mizbeach? Why can't it be in between the mizbeach and the heichal? So let's see. So now, my kasavar. What does Rabbi Yosef Glili hold? Ikasavar kule mizbeach bedarum kai. Okay, well, if Rabbi Yosef Glili holds that the mizbeach is in the south of the azar, and we'll see what that looks like in a second. Nukme mikosel heichal viladorim bein ulam la mizbeach v'inami k'sav kedusha zeichal v'ulam chadai nukme mikosel ulam viladorim bein ulam v'la mizbeach. Chevra, what does that mean? I'm going to drink a little bit of water. Because remember, we had two psukim. The first pasuk had said, "V'nasata Kiyor bein oil ma'id ve'in mizbeach." The first pasuk had said that we want to have the Kiyor in the middle between the mizbeach and the oil ma'id. Yet Rabbi Yosef Glili says that the Kiyor has to be to the south of the mizbeach, and it's not in between them. How come this is so? So if we say that the mizbeach is in the south of the azar, right? That was the first suggestion, right? Okay, so let's take a look at this diagram over here. So here we have the mizbeach in the south of the azara. If you remember from yesterday, there's that blue line running through the middle of the azara. Anything below that blue line is in the south of the azara. So we have the mizbeach to the south of the azara. Well, remember, we want to make sure that the mizbeach is that there's nothing between the mizbeach and the opening of the heichal, right? Because the second pasuk had said, "Ve'es mizbach ha'ola pesach oil moed," right? I think that was the pasuk. Some pesach mishkan oil moed. So we want to make sure that there's nothing between the mizbeach and the opening to the heichal. Now, if you remember from yesterday, the opening of the ulam, the Pesach ulam is 20 amas wide. The Pesach ha'heichel, the opening of the heichel, is 10 amas wide, and the halfway line would run smack in the middle, which means that be'etzem there is 5 amas of the opening of the heichel in the south of the azar, where the mizbeach is. So now, what are we looking at? So if we say that the mizbeach is in the south of the azara, okay, just right below the blue line and touching it. Well, what we can do is, so we had said that there's basically 5 amis of the opening of the heichal in the south of the azara. So as long as we keep the Kiyor out of those first 5 amis, there will be nothing obstructing, nothing blocking the mizbeach and the opening of the heichal, and then you could put the Kiyor just below that, and that way you could satisfy everything, right? You'll have ves mizbach ola some pesach oil moed, right? That there's nothing between the mizbeach and the opening of the heichal because we kept the Kiyor out of there. And the first pasuk has v'nasata sakir bein oil moed vein mizbeach, and we want the Kiyor to be between the oil moed and the mizbeach, which it is. And you don't need, right? Rabbi Yosef Glili had said that the Kiyor is to the south of the mizbeach, but if you look at this diagram, we could satisfy both of those requirements without needing the Kiyor to be to the south of the mizbeach. Right? If you look at this diagram, right, you have the blue line there with the halfway mark. You have the mizbeach over there. There's nothing obstructing between the mizbeach and the opening of the heichal. There's a gold line there which represents where the opening of the heichal ends. So as long as you have that the Kiyor below the gold line, it won't be obstructing the mizbeach and the opening of the heichal. and yet it's still between the mizbeach and the Ohel Moed, without having to be to the south of the mizbeach. And alternatively, if you want to say that the ulam and the heichal have the same level of kedusha, and therefore you want to make sure that the kiyor is also not obstructing the mizbeach and the opening of the heichal. Okay, so then the dark green dot represents having the kiyor be right. The dark green line represents where basically the ulam, the opening of the ulam ends. So as long as the green dot, which represents the kiyor, is is south of that dark green line, so then again, you'll have nothing obstructing between the mizbeach and the opening of the ulam or the opening of the heichal, and you'll have the kiyor just below that, and it'll be between the mizbeach and the Ohel Moed, while also allowing the direct line from the mizbeach into the ulam and into the heichal without requiring the kiyor to be to the south of the mizbeach. It could be between the mizbeach and the Ohel Moed. Then drink a stick of water. Right, so again, my kasaver, what does Rabbi Yosef Glili hold? Kasaver kula mizbeach bedarim koi. If he says that the entire mizbeach is in the south of the Azar, nukme mikosel heichol viladarim. Why don't you just put the kiyor in between the mizbeach and the Ohel Moed, just south of the opening of the heichol, so it's not blocking the direct line from the mizbeach into the opening of the heichal, while also being between the mizbeach and the Ohel Moed. Bein ulam v'la mizbeach, between the ulam and the mizbeach. Right, kilu, the kiyor will be between the mizbeach and the Ohel Moed. V'inami, alternatively, kasaver kedushas heichal v'ulam chadi, and even if you want to say that the ulam has the same level of kedusha as the heichal, so you also want to make sure that there's nothing blocking between the mizbeach and the opening of the ulam. So nukme mikosel ulam v'ladarim b'vein ulam v'la mizbeach. Okay, so as we see with the dark green dot, move it below the opening of the ulam, and again there will be nothing obstructing, nothing blocking between the mizbeach and the opening of the ulam, while still being able to have the kiyor in the middle between the mizbeach and the Ohel Moed. Why does Rabbi Yosef Glili have to say that the kiyor is to the south of the mizbeach? So therefore, it can't be that Rabbi Yosef Glili holds that the mizbeach is in the south of the Azara, because again, why then would the kiyor have to be to the south of the mizbeach? Nami, alternatively, okay, alternatively, we can suggest that according to Rabbi Yosef Glili, the mizbeach is half in the north and half in the south. We'll have a diagram for that in a second. Nukmi mikosol eichol v'ladorim ben ulam v'lamizbeach v'inami kasaver kedushas ulam v'eichol chada hi nukmi mikosol ulam v'ladorim ben ulam v'lamizbeach. Same question, be'etzem. Here's another diagram. Right, so what do we see in this diagram? We see that the mizbeach is right in the middle of the Azar. Half of the mizbeach is in the north of the Azar, half of it is in the south of the Azar. But we have the same exact question, right? You have the yellow dot, you have the gold dot representing the kiyor. Just make sure that it's below the gold line. The gold line basically aligns with the beginning of the opening of the heichal. So as long as you just keep the kiyor below the gold line, so then you'll have a direct line between the mizbeach and the opening of the heichal, and you can also now have the kiyor between the mizbeach and the heichal. So you satisfy both requirements, that the kiyor is in the middle between the mizbeach and the heichal, and it's also not blocking the direct line from the mizbeach into the heichal. Or alternatively, if you want to say that the kedusha of the heichal and the kedusha of the ulam are on the same level, so you don't want to be obstructing between the mizbeach and the opening to the ulam either, so there you have the dark green line which aligns with the opening of the ulam, and just make sure that the kiyor is below that. But again, it would still be between the mizbeach and the Ohel Moed. You don't need the kiyor to be to the south of the mizbeach. So let's read that again. So if you say that the mizbeach is half in the north and half in the south, like we just described, so nukme mikosel heichol v'ladarim. So just put the kiyor below the opening of the heichol. Ben ulam v'la mizbeach, and it will be between the oil moed and the mizbeach. Vinami alternatively kasavar kedusha so ulam ve'eichol chadehi. Alternatively, if you say that the heichol and the ulam have the same level of kedusha, and therefore you want to make sure that there's a direct line between the mizbeach and the opening of the ulam as well. So nukme mikosel ulam v'ladorm. So just make sure that it's below, it's south of the opening of the ulam, which I have a dark green line. Just make sure that the kiyor is beneath the dark green line. Between the oil moed and the mizbeach. So again, why, if the mizbeach was half in the north and half in the south, why would Rabbi Yosef Aglili have to say that the kiyor is to the south of the mizbeach? It could be between the mizbeach and the oil moed, like the pasuk says. Rather, it's because Rabbi Yosef Aglili holds that the mizbeach is entirely in the north of the Azarah. Kinami mukmas lo mikosel eichel v'la tzofin havale ben ulam v'la mizbeach. Right, there was some words you can add there. Okay, yeah. Let's add those words. It'll make it easier to read. So the Agos Tzionim adds v'nukme ben eichel v'la tzofin kasav kedusha eichel v'ulam chada. So kinami mukmas lo because eichel v'la tzofin havle ben ulam v'la mizbeach v'nukma mikosel ulam v'la tzofin b'vein ulam v'la mizbeach omar kra tzafon sheyei tzofin panim mikelim. Fine. Let's have a look at a diagram. It'll make more sense, and we'll read it back inside in a second. Let me drink a stick of water. Okay. So basically, if we say that the mizbeach is in the north of the Azara, okay, so if that is the case, so we see, so again, there's that gold line which aligns with where the with the opening of the heichel. So just make sure that the kiyor is above that gold line, so you have a direct line from the mizbeach into the opening of the heichel, and then above that you'll have the kiyor. And if you want to say that the heichel and the ulam have the same level of kedusha, so then just make sure that the kiyor is above the north of the opening to the ulam. So and you would satisfy basically having a direct line between the mizbeach and the opening of the ulam, the opening of the heichel, and you can still have the kiyor between the mizbeach and the oil moed. Why does the kiyor need to be to the south of the mizbeach? Let's read that inside. Okay, so the mizbeach is entirely in the north of the Azar, like we just saw. Now, I'm going to add some words here. V'nukme bein heichel v'la tzofin. Okay, but still, why don't you have the kiyor basically where the gold dot is, right? As long as it's just north of the opening of the heichel. Okay, back in the Gemara. Well, because he holds that the kedusha of the ulam, right, the heichel and the ulam have the same level of kedusha, so you want to make sure that there's nothing obstructing, nothing in between the mizbeach and the opening of the ulam as well. Kinami mukmas la mikosel heichel v'la tzofin havle ben ulam v'la mizbeach. And that would be between the ulam and the mizbeach. We want to make sure that there's nothing obstructing. V'nukma mikosel ulam v'la tzofin b'min ulam v'la mizbeach. Okay, but why don't you just have it where we have our green dot there, just basically above the opening of the ulam, but still between the mizbeach and the oil moed? Well, listen to this. Omar Kra, the pasuk says tzafona. That when the pasuk says tzafona, tzafona is also like pona. Pona is like panui, cleared out. She'etzafin panui mikelim, that there shouldn't be any vessels in the north of the Azar. No vessels in the north of the Azar. Therefore, the kiyor can't be in the north of the Azar. Zeu. So therefore, where do we land? We land here. That basically, what do we see here? Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds that the mizbeach needs to be in the north of the Azara, as we see in this diagram. The mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. We also see that between the mizbeach and the opening of the heichal, as well as between the mizbeach and the opening of the ulam, there's nothing in between. There's a direct line from the mizbeach to the opening of the ulam and the opening of the heichal. We also said that the kiyor can't be in the north, right? It says Safona, Pona, Panui, it has to be, north has to be clear out of all vessels. The Kiyor can't be anywhere in the north. So then where does it have to be? It must be right to the south of the Mizbeach, and therefore it is in the south of the Azara. It's between the Ulam and the Mizbeach, it's between the Heichel, it's between the Olamoid and the Mizbeach, not mamish like in the middle, because as we see, it's to the south of the Mizbeach, but it's still kind of like in between them, even though it's not directly in between them. And so we satisfy both psukim. You have the mizbeach where it says Vesa mizbeach, mizbeach ola, right? Some pesach omoid that the mizbeach has a direct line into the ulam and into the heichal, and we also satisfy v'nasat zakir bein omoid v'gomer that the kiyor is in between, not literally in between, but technically, right, you have the Olamoid, and then you have the Kiyor, and then you have the Mizbeach. So what do we see? So we see that according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar. And since the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar, it's like we had said yesterday, right? In terms of answering the Mishnah and Talmud, remember we had talked about that the pyre, this smaller pyre was 4 amas up from the southwest corner of the Mizbeach. That is because, well, the first amma is the yesod, the second amma is the sovev, then you have the horn of the mizbeach, that's already 3 ammas, then you need another amma for where the kohanim walk, and then finally you could have your smaller pyre 4 ammas up into the mizbeach. Okay, so we want to suggest, or Shrevia wants to suggest that the author of the Mishnah in Talmud is Rabbi Yossi HaGilili. Mantana de Polig Ole de Rabbi Yossi HaGilili, who argues with Rabbi Yossi HaGilili and says that the Mizbeach is not in the north of the Azar, but rather it is in the south of the Azar. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the answer is it's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the Tana that we learned in a brayso. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Tzafon she'et Tzafon pani mikula miklum. Says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that when it says Tzafona, it's not that the north is simply cleared out of vessels, but that the north of the Azara is cleared out of everything. Even the Mizbeach can't be in the north of the Azara. Vafilu min ha-Mizbeach, it has to be cleared out even of the Mizbeach. Therefore, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that the Mizbeach is in the south of the Azara. And that essentially wraps up that whole discussion that we just started, that we began yesterday, where we were trying to figure out a source to say that Rabbi Yossi says that the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. We tried to do that based on the Mishnah in Talmud, and then we saw different versions of who the author of that Mishnah in Talmud can be, with wrapping up the final view just now that it could be Rabbi Yossi HaGilili's opinion. And now we move on to the next section of the daf. When the Mizbeach gets damaged, says the Gemara, Amarav Mizbeach shenivgam kol hakachim shenishchatu sham psulin. It says Rav that when you have, that if the Mizbeach becomes damaged, and now it's, it needs to be fixed. So in the meantime, any korbanis that were slaughtered, and they're just meat, right? And they're meat, and they're waiting for Zrikas Adam, but no Zrikas Adam can take place because the Mizbeach is damaged. So all of those korbanis that have already been slaughtered, all korbanis that have already been slaughtered, Sham Psulin, they're apostle. And says Rav, look, we had a verse to learn this from, but alas, we have forgotten it. Kisalik Rav Kahana, when Rav Kahana made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, I imagine this is probably a reference to the Gemara at the end of Bava Kama that describes when Rav Kahana moved to Eretz Yisrael, and that story with Rabbi Yochanan. Anyways, so when Rav Kahana went up to Eretz Yisrael, Ashkechel Reb Shimon bar Rebbe, he found Reb Shimon bar Rebbe, the Karmar who was saying Mishum Reb Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi, in the name of, so Reb Shimon bar Rebbe was quoting Reb Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi. Minayin lemizbeach shenivgam shekol hakodim shenishchatu sham psulin. So how do we know exactly what Rav was saying? How do we know? But he's looking specifically for a pasuk that when the mizbeach gets damaged, any kodshim that have already been slaughtered are psulin now. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, "V'zavachta olav es olosecha v'es shlomecha," that you will slaughter on the mizbeach olas and shlomes v'chi alecha ata v'chi olav ata zoveach. But why is it saying v'zavachta olav? They're going to slaughter on the mizbeach. You don't slaughter on the mizbeach. You slaughter. Right? The ola would be to the north, right? The shlom, and you were in the azara. Why is it saying they're going to slaughter on the mizbeach? Ela kishu shalem v'lo kishu chaser. What it means v'zavachta olav, it means that you'll slaughter so long as the mizbeach is in its proper state, as long as it is complete, not if it is damaged, not if it is lacking in any way. If it's lacking in any way, then don't, right? Then the korbanos are going to be posel. When Rav Kahana heard that they were attributing this halacha to this pasuk of v'zavachta olav v'zolosech v'shlomecha, Omar, Rav Kahana said, Hainu kra de'ishtamit le-Rav. This must be the verse that Rav was searching for, that Rav had forgotten about when he had said that we had a pasuk to teach this halacha, that when the mizbeach gets damaged, the korbanos that have been slaughtered are posel. Rav said that we had forgotten which pasuk. Rav Kahana hears the pasuk and he says, aha, this must have been it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar echad zev echad zeh psul. Now Rabbi Yochanan, if you noticed, Rav and also Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi had specifically been talking about kol zvachim shenishchatu, korbanos that have already been slaughtered and they're no longer alive. This is a discussion that we had, I believe, earlier on the daf. It looks like it's quoting Daf Yud Beis about by lechayim nidchin. Can live animals become nidche? Because what happens? You have right, you makdish an animal. Now you have this animal. It's kosher. It's great. You're going to slaughter it. You're going to offer it as a korban. But now the mizbeach gets damaged, and now you can't offer this kodshim as a korban because there's no mizbeach to offer it on, and therefore it becomes posel. The question is, do we say that by lechayim live animals can become nidche to the extent that they're now going to be posel forever, and even when you fix the mizbeach, you still can't use these animals because they're nidche, dachwit, they're pushed off, they're no longer usable. So Rav and Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi had said that when it comes to meat, when it comes to animals that have already been slaughtered and are no longer alive, and then the mizbeach gets damaged and you can't do Zrikas Adam and continue with the korban. So in that case, Rav had said that the meat, that the animals are psulin. Rabbi Yochanan extends that even to live animals as well. Rav didn't say that about live animals. But Rabbi Yochanan says even live animals would be psulin as well. B'mai kamiflagi. What's the machlokas? Why does Rav say it's only slaughtered animals, whereas Rabbi Yochanan says it's also live animals? Rav sover by l'chaim eino nidchin, Rabbi Yochanan sover by l'chaim nidchin. The answer is Rav says that Rav holds that live animals cannot get nidched, don't get pushed off, don't get cancelled forever. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says yes, even Baile Chaim, even live animals can get disqualified like that. That if the mizbeach gets damaged, now you can't offer these korbanos that are currently still alive. They're no longer able to be slaughtered as korbanos according to Reb Yochanan. Going to drink a shtickle water. Meisvei, we have a contradiction, a question on Rab. Kol hakodshim shahayu ad shelo nivne HaMizbeach. Interesting. So this is talking about, the assumption for now is we're talking about, let's say at the beginning of Bayis Sheni. All right? There was the Churban Bayis Rishon for 70 years, there was exile, and now the Yidden are coming back to Eretz Yisrael. But they haven't yet built the Mizbeach. That right? It says, Ad Shelo Nivna HaMizbeach. They hadn't yet built the Mizbeach when people are already getting excited, they're already being makdish, korbanos, right? I'm sure you can only imagine, right? We can only imagine Mashiach comes tomorrow and all of a sudden we're all, finding, the first sheep we can find and we're saying, this is going to be my korban and we're so excited, but the Mizbeach hasn't necessarily been built yet. So kol hakodshim shoyu ad shelo nivneh hamizbeach. So any animals that were made into right, that you said I'm going to bring you as a korban, but the mizbeach hasn't yet been built. Ve'achar kach nivna mizbeach, and then the mizbeach was built. So now what happens to these animals? Can you now offer them as a korban? Psulin. They are psulin. So So what's the question? The question is that we see that even though we're talking about live animals, we're still saying that they're puzzle since you were makdish them at the time that there was no mizbeach yet. So we see it's a kasha and Rab who says Baalei Chaim ein nidchin. Here we seem to be saying that these animals that were set aside as korbanos are psulin, can't be offered as korbanos even when the mizbeach is eventually built, because at the time that they were designated there was no mizbeach. But the Gemara says, no, that is not a question, because nivne, the chuyin mei koreninu. This is, of course, when it comes to the sugya of dichor, right? There are different chilukim that can be made. We just talked about Baalei Chaim nidchin or not, but there's also famously the chiluk of nire v'nidche or dachui mei kar. So until now we've been discussing nire v'nidche. That if initially it was in a good state, it was kosher, but then it became puzzle. For example, you had slaughtered these korbanos when the mizbeach was still intact, but then it got damaged. So you have these korbanos that were slaughtered and they were kosher and everything was going to be great. You were going to do zrikas adam. Now you find out that the mizbeach got damaged. Now you can't proceed with these korbanos, and we're saying that they're nidche forever. You can't figure they're puzzle. So that's nir v'nidche. They were kosher, but then they became puzzle. However, if somebody is makdish an animal at a time when there b'chlal is no mizbeach, it was puzzle me'ikar. It was never kosher, because at the time you were makdish the animal, there wasn't a mizbeach. It was puzzle to begin with. And the Gemara points out that the Brisa can't be talking about Dachui Me'ikara, because that's a whole question. Is Dachui Me'ikara even considered Dichui or not? And to say that this Brisa is talking about Dachui Me'ikara, is talking about when you were makdish an animal at the time when there was no Mizbeach, well then you're opening up a whole can of worms and you're jumping into that old discussion, and this now becomes a proof for the opinion who says Dachui Me'ikara is Dachui, because we're saying that you had set aside these animals, there was no mizbeach, therefore they're psulin. So now this would now be a proof to say that Dachui Me'ikara is Dachui, and it's a kasha, and the opinion says Dachui Me'ikara is not Dachui. We're saying we don't want to. This Brisa is not weighing in on the whole machlokas about Dachui Me'ikara or not. So rather, let's avoid the whole Dachui Me'ikara can of worms, and instead, Ela ad shelo neras hamizbeach. So rather, what this is talking about is that you said this was talking about, let's say, Bayis Rishon, the Beis Hamikdash is still standing, and you say, wow, Gavaldik, I'm going to bring a korban. You set aside an animal, it's going to be a korban. Nebuchadnezzar comes to town and destroys the Beis Hamikdash, and now there's no mizbeach anymore. And we're saying that these animals are now psulin. So again, it's a kasha and Rab, because we're saying that Baalei Chaim nidchin. Right, so again, so ela achlo neras amizbech. They were talking about animals that were set aside to be korbanos before the mizbech was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. But neras don't ask kasha on Rav from this scenario. Ha izkunu. Of course, these korbanos are going to be unusable. If the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, by the time these animals would be able to be offered as korbanos when the next Beis HaMikdash is built, they're going to be way too old anyways, and be an animal that's too old can't be offered. It's considered a mum. So of course you're going to be unable to offer these animals. If we're talking about animals that were set aside as to be korbanos, and then Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. Of course they're going to be psulin. At the very least, they're going to end up being too old. So ela achelo nifkom hamizbeach. Rather, what is it talking about? It must be talking about animals that were set aside before, the animals that were set aside to be korbanos when the mizbeach was kosher, but then the mizbeach got damaged, and we're saying that these animals are psulin, and it's a kasha and Rav who says by lechaim ein nidchin, only slaughtered animals, not live animals. But Rav will say, "Whoa, let's take it. Yeah, this is a very problematic brisa to begin with. We're trying to figure out what in the world is it talking about. We changed the brisa 3 times already. First we said it was talking about Achelo Nivna Mizbeach. Then we said Achlo Neras Mizbeach. Now we're saying Achlo Nifkam Mizbeach. Says Rav, well, this is a problematic brisa. I'm going to suggest another edit. Have you not already answered and changed and try to squeeze this brisa to make it make sense already 3 times? Well, I'll make another amendment. Ema shenishchatu. I'll say that this brisa is talking about not animals that are still alive when the mizbeach gets damaged, but rather the brisa is talking about animals that are korbanos that have already been slaughtered, and then the mizbeach gets damaged. Yes, they're psulin, says Rab, because dafka they've already been slaughtered; they're no longer alive. Okay. Ve'omar Rav Gidol Amar Rab, but did not Rav Gidol Amar Rab say mizbeach shene'ekar maktirin kitaris b'mkomo? That says Rav Gidol Amar Rab that the mizbeach hapnimi, the inner altar in the heichal, where the incense would be burnt every day, if that mizbeach gets moved and it's no longer there, Maktirin ketaris b'mkomo, so you can, no problem, you could just burn the ketaris where the mizbeach was. So why doesn't Rav say the same thing over here, that even if the mizbeach gets damaged, well, no problem, just do the zrikas adam anyways where the mizbeach would have been, just like by the ketaris, if the mizbeach hapnimi is gone, so just burn the ketaris where the mizbeach hapnimi was. So also here, if the mizbeach gets damaged and they have to fix it, so just do the zrikas adam for the korbanos where the mizbeach was, just without the mizbeach. So answers the Gemara, the Amar Rava, it's like Rava says, Moda ayi Rabbi Yehuda b'damim, that Rabbi Yehuda says when it comes to blood, you need the mizbeach. Hachanami Moda Rav b'damim, here Rav holds the same way. That no, even though, yes, Rav did say when it comes to burning ketoris and the mizbeach hapnimi, that if the mizbeach hapnimi is not there, you can just burn the ketoris in the place where the mizbeach hapnimi usually would be. You could burn the ketoris there, but that wouldn't apply for blood, for zrikas adam. If the mizbeach gets damaged and now they need to take it in for repairs, any korbanos that were already slaughtered become possible. You can't just do zrikas adam where the mizbeach was. So now Ravi had just said that Rabbi Yehuda admits when it comes to the dam, to the blood, that you need the mizbeach. So now basically the rest of today's daf, we're essentially going to be, right, the Gemara now says, my Rabbi Yehuda, what is this scenario where Rabbi Yehuda says that for the blood you need the mizbeach. Now we're basically going to spend the entire rest of the daf introducing what this is, but really we're only going to get to the punchline at the beginning of tomorrow's daf of what exactly was this scenario where Rabbi Yehuda says that you need the mizbeach. And this and along the way, we're going to discuss the dimensions of the mizbeach. So here we go. My Rabbi Yehuda. What is this scenario of Rabbi Yehuda where he requires a mizbeach for blood? The Tanya that we learn in the Brayso, Bayomahu Kidesh HaMelech, that when King Solomon was inaugurating the Beis HaMikdash, he made holy Toch HaChotzer, the Azor. He made the Azor holy. Ki Mizbeach, we have to amend the text. Hanechoshes asher lifnei Hashem, ki Mizbach hanechoshes asher lifnei Hashem, koton me'ochil, because the Mizbeach before God was too small. Divarm kichsavim to Rabbi Yehuda. Says Rabbi Yehuda, what does this pasuk mean? Let's read it. Right, so he says Divarm kichsavim. The pasuk is to be taken literally. So let's read the pasuk again literally. So I'm reading it again. Bayomo, on that day, Kidesh. Let me read it from the pasuk. Bayomo Kidesh or Kidash? Kidash. Kidash HaMelech es toch HaChotzer v'gomer. That when King Solomon was inaugurating the temple, so he made the Azara holy, meaning so that you can actually slaughter korbanos and offer them on the floor of the Azara. You didn't need to offer them on the Mizbeach. Ki Mizbach HaNechoshes asher lifnei Hashem kotu me'ochil. It's all of us mincha, etc. Because the Mizbeach was not large enough to be able to offer all the korbanos. The previous pasuk says that on that day 142,000 korbanos were offered, and there simply was not enough time in the day to be able to offer 142,000 korbanos on the Mizbeach, and therefore King Solomon made the whole Azara holy, so that korbanos can be offered just on the floor of the Azar. You didn't need to bring it to the top of the Mizbeach to burn. You could just burn it on the floor of the Azar. Because the Mizbeach simply was not large enough to be able to handle all of the korbanos. 142,000 korbanos. Rabbi Yossi says to Rabbi Yehuda, but one second, Rabbi Yehuda, one second. The pasuk says, "Elef olis yailish shloima ala mizbeachahu." That another pasuk says that Shloima was able to offer 1,000 korbanos a day on the mizbeach from the Mishkan. On the mizbeach from the Mishkan. Now, Chaver, I'm going to pull up a diagram over here. What this diagram shows is bird's eye view of the mizbeach. This was the mizbeach. So on the left, what we have is the mizbeach from the Mishkan in the midbar, and on that mizbeach, it was 5 amas by 5. It was square. It was 5 amas by 5 amas. This is a bird's eye view. So you have the 4 corners there with the 4 horns on the 4 corners. Okay, you weren't going to be offering korbanos on those corners. Those are, of course, for applying the blood of chatas, etc. That green square in the middle there, that is the area where the Kohanim would be able to walk around. You wouldn't have a raging fire in that area. That's where the Kohanim would walk around. So really, the pyre on that Mizbeach, the Mizbeach of Moshe Rabbeinu from the Midbar, was really just 1 amma by 1 amma in the middle. That's it. And Rabbi Yossi says that the pasuk says that Elef Olis Yailish Shloma Mizbeachahu. That even on that tiny little Mizbeach, where the pyre was just 1 amma by 1 amma, Shlomo was able to offer 1,000 korbanos a day. V'ilu b'veis olamim u'omer, and by the Beis Hamikdash, what we were just discussing with Shlomo Melech inaugurating the Beis Hamikdash, it says Vayizbach Shlomo as Zevach HaShlomim, that Shlomo sacrificed these korbanos, Asher Zavach LaHashem, that he sacrificed the Rebbeinu Shalom, Bakar Esem V'Shnayim Elef, 22,000 cows. Okay, and then there were another 120,000 olas. Uchshata Magir L'Cheshbon Olas, U'Leminyan Amis Zegadol Mizeh. And when you do the math, there's enough room on the mizbeach. What does that mean? I'm going to drink a little water. So basically, right, we had that pasuk that says that Shlomo managed to offer 1,000 korbanos a day on that pitsky little tiny mizbeach from the Mishkan. Now, the thing is, the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash was not just the pyre on the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash was not just 1 amma by 1 amma. No, it was 20 amas by 20 amas. Meaning it was 400 times the area of the pyre in the Mishkan, right? One time, right? The area of the pyre on the mizbeach in the Mishkan it was a 1 by 1 pyre, so 1 times 1 is 1. But in the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash, the pyre was 20 amas by 20 amas, which is an area of 400. So the area of the small mizbeach in the Mishkan was an area of 1, and the area of the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash was 400. And says Rabbi Yossi, the pasuk says that Shlomo managed to offer 1,000 korbanos a day on the tiny little mizbeach. Well, then that would mean that on a pyre 400 times the size, he would be able to offer 400,000 korbanos in a day in the larger mizbeach of the Beis Hamikdash. That's certainly enough to be able to handle the 142,000 that were offered on that day when they were inaugurating the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda had said there was not enough room on the mizbeach. They couldn't offer 142,000 korbanos just on the mizbeach. Therefore, they had to be mekadesh the whole azar, so that you could offer korbanos just on the floor of the azar. Rabbi Yossi says, no. There was plenty of room on the mizbeach. There was enough capacity on the mizbeach to offer 400,000 korbanos that day. 142,000, easy. So we're going to have to explain later, then what does it mean that he was mekadesh the azar? But anyways, okay. Instead, the Gemara asks, Elamahu koton mi'alchil. Well, then what does it mean in the pasuk when it says that because the mizbeach was too small to be able to handle all the korbanos? Rabbi Yossi says, look, on that day they were inaugurating the new mizbeach, the big mizbeach that was, with the pyre of 20 amas for 20 amas. What happens to the mizbeach from the midbar? The mizbeach that they used from the midbar that they were using it all up until that day. Okay, it was retired. It was no longer going to be used. But instead of just saying like, okay, they threw the original mizbeach, the mizbeach nechoshes, in the garbage, that wouldn't be very sensitive. So instead it said, that one was just a little bit too small. But the fact of the matter is they weren't using it anymore. But they said, okay, it's too small, therefore we're using the bigger mizbeach, but But it's not that the mizbeach wasn't large enough to be able to handle the korbanos. The mizbeach had plenty of room to be able to handle the korbanos. When it says that the mizbeach was too small, it's not talking about the mizbeach of the Beis Hamikdash was too small. No, it was saying that with regard to the mizbeach hanachoshes from the Mishkan, they don't need it anymore because now they have the big mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash, and they say kind of that the mizbeach hanachoshes was too small, but really what it's saying is that they didn't need it anymore. And we say, just like if you have somebody who's puzzled to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, you're not going to say, oh, he's puzzled. Instead, you'll say, he's too small. Instead of having to focus on like, this guy's a puzzle guy, you come up with kind of, he's too small, and that's why he's not doing the avodah. Fact of the matter is, he's puzzled. So you're also about the mizbeach hanachoshes from the midbar. We're saying, okay, it was too small, but the fact of the matter is, we just don't need it anymore. Now, frag the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, Shaper come Rabbi Yossi. New Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi is making some good points. He just mathematically proved that there was plenty of room on the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash. So why did you have to sanctify the whole floor to offer korbanos on the floor? Well, Rabbi Yehuda the time to Omar. Well, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda actually holds that the mizbeach in the Mishkan was not 5 amos by 5 amos. It was 10 amos by 10 amos. Now, the pasuk in Parshas Truma says that it was 5 amos by 5 amos. So we're going to have to explain how Rabbi Yehuda understands that pasuk. But basically, Rabbi Yehuda holds that actually the mizbeach in the desert, the mizbeach hanachoshes from the midbar, Rabbi Yehuda holds that mizbeach was 10 amos by 10 amos. Mizbeach shasa Moshe Gadol Oya, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the mizbeach that Moshe made, the mizbeach from the midbar, was actually a large mizbeach. It was 10 amos by 10 amos. We'll get in a minute. We'll get into how he learns that. But what's the point for now? The point is, so you have this diagram over here, right? So we had looked at the smaller diagram on the left, where the mizbeach is 5 amos by 5 amos. But if we said the mizbeach, and we'll learn out in a minute how exactly Rabbi Yehuda learns that the mizbeach was 10 amos by 10 amos. But if you say that the mizbeach was 10 amos by 10 amos, which of course is the bird's eye view of the mizbeach to the right, the larger one, well, if that is the case, so if we have this bird's eye view, so you have the 4 corners, of course, those are the horns of the mizbeach, and then you also have that green inner ring, which is where the Kohanim would walk around. But then the whole rest of the mizbeach is the pyre. And instead of, right, according to Rabbi Yossi, the pyre was just 1 amma by 1 amma with an area of 1. However, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mizbeach was 10 amos by 10 amos. The pyre is actually much larger. It's 6 by 6. With an area of 36. Now, the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash had an area, it was 20 times 20, had an area of 400. So now, 6 times 6, which is the mizbeach in the midbar, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's an area of 36, as compared to an area of 400. 400 is only about 11 times 36. Which means that the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash, so Rabbi Yossi had made, according to Rabbi Yossi's calculations, the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash had the capacity to order to burn. What's the word I'm thinking of? Had the capacity to handle whatever 400 times the amount of the mizbeach from the mizbeach hanachoshes. According to Rabbi Yehuda's calculations, though, where the pyre of the mizbeach hanachoshes from the midbar was actually at an area of 36, well, that compared to an area of 400 for the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash, the capacity of the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash was only 11 times that of the mizbeach hanachoshes from the midbar. And that pasuk had said earlier that Shlomo was able to sacrifice 1,000 korbanos on the mizbeach hanachoshes. Okay. Now, the Mizbeach in the Beis HaMikdash was able to handle 11 times that amount, according to Rabbi Yehuda. That's only 11,000 korbanos in a day. That's far short of the 142,000 that were offered on that day. And that is why Rabbi Yehuda says that the Mizbeach simply was unable to handle the 142,000 korbanos that were offered that day. Drink a little more water. Titania, as we learn in a Brisa, Chomesh Amos Orech v'Chomesh Amos Rochav Dvarim Kichsam Div Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, look, when the pasuk says in Parshas Truma that the Mizbeach was 5 amas by 5 amas, says Rabbi Yossi, that's what it means. It was 5 amas by 5 amas, like we saw in the diagram, the smaller Mizbeach. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says Rabbi Yehuda, it was 10 amas by 10 amas. How does he get that? Well, Nemer Khan, Ravua, v'Nemer L'Hol and Ravua. Well, because it says Ravua by the Mizbach Anechoshes. It says Vasisa, I'm reading the pasuk, Vasisa says Mizbeach Atzishitim Chomesh Amas Orech, v'Chomesh Amas Rochav, Ravua Yiyeh HaMizbeach, etc. But it says Ravua in another place. In the prophecy of Ezekiel, it says Vasisa HaMizbeach, no. It says Va'ariel Shtei Mesei Orech B'Shtei Mesei Rochav Ravua El Abbas Ravav. It says Ravua by Ezekiel as well. Malaholan me'emtza iso haya moded. Afkan me'emtza iso haya moded. Also, Manolan, how do we know by Ezekiel? It's from the middle. Tichsiv Va'ariel Shtei Mesei Amo L'chol Ruach Oinu El Yud Beis Al Yud Beis Kshu Omer El Arbas Ravav. Basically, I have another slide over here. So on the left, we see basically how Rabbi Yossi learns it. Simply, it was 5 amas by 5 amas. According to Rabbi Yehuda, however, no, the 5 amas, if you look at the larger bird's eye view to the right, so I have like a circle in the middle of the Mizbeach, and then you see that it's 5 amas in each direction. So the 5, Rabbi Yehuda argues that the 5 amas that the Torah is talking about by the Mizbeach, it's not that each side was 5 amas, that it was 5 by 5 total, like Rabbi Yossi says. No. It's that from the center of the Mizbeach, it was 5 amas in each direction, meaning that the sides of the Mizbeach were actually 10 amas each. So it's actually 10 by 10, argues Rabbi Yehuda. So let's read that again inside. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, Nemer Kan Ravua, it says here by the Mizbeach, in Parshas Truma it says Ravua, V'Nemer L'Hol Ravua, it says by Ezekiel Ravua. Malol be'emtza iso yamoded, just like by Ezekiel, they're measuring from the middle, like we just saw in the diagram. Afkan me'emtza iso yamoded. So here also by the Mizbeach Anechoshes, the 5 amas that we're talking about in each direction from the center of the Mizbeach. Meaning that really the Mizbeach was 10 amas by 10 amas. Also, Manolan, how do we know by Ezekiel that we're talking about from the center? Tichsiv, the Pasuk says, Va'ariel, Shtei Mesrei Amo, L'chol Ruach, that the Mizbeach was 12 amas in each direction. Oinu El Yud Beis Al Yud Beis. Maybe it means that the Mizbeach was 12 amas by 12 amas. Kishu Omer El Arboas Riva'av, when it says to the 4 corners, Melamed She Me'emtzahu Moded, it means that it is from the middle in all directions. So it's saying there that it was 12 amas in each direction from the middle, i.e. 24 by 24. Here also it's 5 amas in each direction, meaning 10. The Mizbeach was 10 amas by 10 amas. Rabbi Yossi ki gomer gzeira shavet. When Rabbi Yossi learns the gzeira shavet, right, what does he do with Ravua? Begovahu to gomer. He learns out Ravua, the gzeira shavet Ravua, talking about not the area of the Mizbeach, but the height of the Mizbeach. Titana that we learn in a brayso, v'sholish amas komoso dvam kichsavim div Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that when the pasuk says, also in Parshas Truma, that the height of the mizbeach is 3 amas, what does it say? Right, it says by the mizbeach, mizbeach atzeshitim chomesh amos orech, chomesh amos rochav, ravur yav mizbeach, v'shalosh amos komaso. Says Rabbi Yehuda that the mizbeach was not 10 amas tall. We always just talk about the mizbeach being 10 amas tall. Says Rabbi Yehuda, no. The mizbeach was 3 amas tall. Right? It says v'shalosh amos komaso. It was 3 amas tall. That's it. Divarim kichsavim to Rabbi Yehuda. It's to be taken literally. Rabbi Yossi, Omer says Rabbi Yossi, Nemarkan Ravua, it says by the Mizbeach, Achitzon Ravua, V'nemalahol Ravua, and it says Ravua by the Mizbeach HaPnimi. Now the Mizbeach HaPnimi was 1 amma by 1 amma, that was its area, and its height was 2 ammas. So its height was twice its area. So Malahol and Govo Pishnaim Ka'orko, just like by the Mizbeach HaPnimi, its height was twice that of its length. Avkampi Shnaim Ka'orko. So here also, the Mizbeach was 5 by 5, but its height was twice that amount. It was 10. That's what Rabbi Yossi learns out from the Gzer Shava of Ravua. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rabbi Yehuda says something interesting to Rabbi Yossi, which is that the pasuk says that the curtains of the surrounding the Mishkan, the Mishkan was basically, there was that kind of tent of sorts with the layers of hides on top of it, and inside there was where you had the Mizbach HaKetoris and the Menorah and the Shulchan, and then of course the Kodesh HaKodashim. And then there was kind of a like a fence around it, curtains around it. And there, in there, that was where like the Mizbeach HaChitzon was, right? These kind of curtains. Now the pasuk says that those curtains were only 5 amas tall. So Rabbi Yehuda asked an interesting question to Rabbi Yossi. He says, Rabbi Yossi, if you're going to say that the Mizbeach was 10 amas tall, well, the curtains surrounding the Mishkan were only 5 amas tall. So basically, everybody could see the kohen. It's like there's like no privacy there, right? The kohen's offering korbanos, and everyone's looking over the wall, and they see the korban, the kohen at the top of the mizbech doing his avodah. You see, right? Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Yossi, shouldn't there be a little more privacy? After kohen oimer agav mizbech v'avodah b'yado v'cholam roino so mibachutz. What could it be that the kohen, the priest, he's doing the avodah in the Mishkan on top of the mizbeach? And everyone's just watching him from the outside because the curtains surrounding are only 5 amas and he's 10 amas up. Rabbi Yossi says to Rabbi Yehuda, listen, the curtains around the courtyard of the Mishkan, by the Mishkan, that's referring to like the Mishkan, like the Kodesh HaKodashim, Ve'al Mizbeach, and the Mizbeach. Ma Mishkan Yud Amos af Mizbeach Yud Amos. Right, the Torah talks about in Parshas Truma, the Kroshim, the beams for the Mishkan, they were 10 Amos tall. And we're saying, in this pasuk, we're juxtaposing Hashem Mishkan Ve'al Mizbeach. We're juxtaposing the Mishkan and the Mizbeach. And it says Rabbi Yossi, just like the Mishkan was 10 Amos tall, the beams were 10 Amos tall, so too the Mizbeach was 10 amas tall. The Omer in the pasuk says, Kloim chomesh esrei amma el hakosef. And Rabbi Yossi wants to explain this pasuk of Kloim chomesh esrei amma, that the curtains were 15 amas. So normally, I think Pashup Pshat, at least Rashi, I think explains on the Torah that that's actually talking about the opening of the entrance, that there was a screen that was 15 amas wide to, cover the entrance, whatever. But Rabbi Yossi says that no, this means that the curtains were not 5 amas tall, but 15 amas tall. And therefore, they were tall enough to cover the Mizbeach. Right? The Mizbeach was 10 amas tall. The curtains around the Mishkan were 15 amas tall. Hey amas, then what's the 5 amas that the pasuk is talking about? Misfas Mizbeach ulamala. From the top of the Mizbeach, which was 10 amas tall, and then the curtains were 15 amas tall, so 50 minus 10 is 5. So from the top of the Mizbeach and up, there were 5 amas to the top of the curtains. Umata Malomer v'shalosh amos komaso, and then Nu Rabbi Yossi, what does the pasuk mean then? V'shalosh amos komaso. That the pasuk says is that the mizbeach was 3 amos, not 10 amos. Misfas sovev ulamala, from the sovev and up. So here's actually the diagram that we're used to from the past several weeks. This is the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash. Obviously, we're talking about the mizbeach in the Mishkan, but the proportions are the same. Where the white arrow is pointing to is from the sovev to the top of the mizbeach, right? Basically, of course, we have the yesod at the bottom of the mizbeach. That's 1 amma tall. Then you have 5 more ammas. That's the sovev, right? That was that ledge that the Kohanim can walk on. And from the sovev to the top of the mizbeach is 3 ammas, right? The mizbeach is 10 ammas, so the yesod is 1 amma. Then it's 5 more ammas to the sovev, right? So 1 and 5 is 6, and then there were 3 more ammas to get to the top of the mizbeach, and then each corner were these horns, which were also an amma. That's 10 ammas. But from the sovev to the top of the mizbeach, excluding the horns, was 3 ammas, and that is what the pasuk is talking about, according to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda ki gamer gzeir shava be rachbo de gamer. Rabbi Yehuda, period. So now Rabbi Yehuda says that the gzeir shava, instead of referring to the height of the mizbeach, like Rabbi Yossi was saying, he says it's talking about the width of the mizbeach, and therefore he learns it out from Ezekiel. Rabbi Yehuda hakam mischaze koin. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the curtains around the Mishkan were 5 amos tall, and the mizbeach was 3 amos tall. Still, if he's going to the top of the mizbeach, which is only 3 amos, and the curtains are only another 2 amos higher than that, 2 amos is what? 3 feet? You're going to be able to see the coin. So nihi de coin mischaze avoda de biyadul mischaze. Granted, sure, maybe people will be able to see the coin's head, but they won't be able to see the avoda that he's doing. Now, fact Gemara, look, I understand, going back to that whole thing with Shlomo Melech, Rabbi Yehuda had initially said that he was makdish the whole azara so that they could be slaughtering korbanos and offering them on the floor of the azara, not on the mizbeach. So it says the Gemara, I understand according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's why the pasuk says Kiddush, that Shlomo Melech was makdish the whole azara so that korbanos can be offered mamish in the azara, not on the mizbeach. Rabbi Yossi, my Kiddush, according to Rabbi Yossi, what does it mean that he was makdish the whole azara? Lahamid but mizbeach. Well, this was the inauguration of the Beis Hamikdash. For the first time, King Solomon was makdish the azara, so that the mizbeach could be in there and they could offer korbanos in this holy azara. I understand to Rabbi Yossi, he explained what was the deal with katan, right? Why were they calling the mizbeach katan? We were saying because, well, it's like you say when a person is possible to work in the Beis Hamikdash, you don't just say he's possible, you say he's too small. So here also, they were done with the mizbach and nechoshes from the midbar, and they said it was too small as a way of saying it's not needed anymore. According to Rabbi Yehuda, what does it mean that the mizbach and nechoshes was too small? It is what it means according to Rabbi Yehuda. Mizbach avonim she'asa shloima tachas mizbach and nechoshes koin ava. That according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mizbeach that was for the Beis Hamikdash, which was to replace the mizbach hanechoshes of the midbar, that big mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash was too small. As we explained earlier, it was only 11 times the size of the mizbach hanechoshes. It did not have the capacity to handle all 142,000 korbanos of the day. For my plige, what's the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi? My sover done in chutz michutz. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, we learned the mizbeach achitzon from the mizbeach achitzon in Ezekiel's prophecy. We're not going to learn the mizbeach achitzon from the mizbeach apnimi, right? Rabbi Yossi had learned from the mizbeach apnimi that the height was twice the length, and therefore by the mizbeach achitzon also the height must be twice its length. Rabbi Yehuda says no, we're not going to learn mizbeach achitzon from mizbeach apnimi. U'masaver done in klimi kli, then done in klimi binyan. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says, look, the mizbach hanechoshes as well as the mizbeach apnimi in the Mishkan were vessels. They were kalim. They were able to be picked up and moved and traveled with. So we learned those out from each other. We're not going to learn out the mizbach harachoshes from the midbar from the prophecy of Ezekiel about the mizbech and the Beis Hamikdash. Friends, we are going to hold it here. Sheesh, it's right now 2:20 a.m. This daf was supposed to be available 20 minutes ago already. It's not going to be available for another 3 hours. So I don't know, Chevra, if anybody, Chevra, let me know on WhatsApp, by the way. This is actually really interesting to know. Do you listen to the daf usually immediately as it comes out? At 2 a.m. Israel time, 7 p.m. California time, 10 p.m. New York time. Do you listen to it like right away? Like, have you noticed that they haven't necessarily been making it on time? I got to get that. Tomorrow I'm planning to record 2 so I can get that buffer back up. But I gotta get back. It's been crazy with all this diagrams and just this daf is probably also over an hour. All these dafs are over. It used to be an hour daf was exceptional. Now it's somehow become the norm. Anyways, in conclusion, the first thing that we talked about at the beginning of the daf was the location of the mizbeach. We kind of finished up that discussion based on the Mishnah from Talmud that we were talking about yesterday. We saw Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion related to the Kiyor being to the south of the mizbeach. He holds that the mizbeach is in the north of the Azar. We discussed when the mizbeach gets damaged. According to Rav, slaughtered animals become pasul. And any animal that was slaughtered and hadn't yet had zrikas adam, and now the mizbeach gets damaged, these animals become pasul. Rabbi Yochanan says not just slaughtered animals, but even animals that are still alive, people were makdish to the animals, then the mizbeach got damaged. These animals are pasul; they can't be used as korbanos. Then we got into the dimensions of the mizbeach. We had a whole long discussion, and King Shlomo and the inauguration of the temple. Pe'etzim, where we landed was that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mizbeach in the Mishkan, the mizbeach anachoshes was 10 amas by 10 amas, its length and width, and its height was 3 amas. Rabbi Yossi says length and width was 5 amas by 5 amas, and its height was 10 amas. Friends, that was Daf Nun Tes, Daf 59 of Masechta Zevachim. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.